Many startups plan to invest in building a great brand, and MVP can seem like a dangerous branding risk. Similarly, entrepreneurs in existing organizations often are constrained by the fear of damaging the parent company's established brand. In either of these cases, there is an easy solution: launch the MVP under a different brand name. In addition, a long term reputation is only at risk when companies engage in vocal launch activities such as PR and building hype. When a product fails to live up to those pronouncement, real long-term damage can happen to a corporate brands, but startup have the advantage of being obscure, having a particularly small number of customer and not having much exposure. Rather than lamenting them, use these advantages to experiment under the radar and then do a public marketing launch once the product has proved itself with the real customer. Finally, it helps to prepare for the fact that MVPs often result in bad news. Unlike traditional concept tests or prototypes, they are designed to speak to the full range of business questions, not just design or technical ones, and they often provide a needed dose of reality. In fact, piercing the reality distortion field is quite uncomfortable. Visionaries are especially afraid of a false negative that customer will reject a flawed MVP that is too small or too limited. It is precisely this attitude that one sees when companies fully launch fully formed product without peer testing. They simply couldn't bear to test them in anything less than their full splendor. Yet there is a wisdom in the visionary sphere. Teams tapped in traditional product development methods are trained to make a go kill decision on a regular basis. That is the essence of the waterfall or a stage gate development model. If an MVP fails, teams are liable to give up hope and abandon the project altogether, but this is a solvable problem. From the MVP to innovation accounting, the solution to this dilemma is the commitment to iteration. You have to commit to lock in a rich agreement ahead of time that no matter what comes of testing the MVP, you will not give up hope. Successful entrepreneurs do not give up at the first sign of trouble, nor do they preserve the plan right into the ground. Instead, they possess a unique combination of persev- perseverance and flexibility. The MVP is just the first step on a journey of learning. Down that road, after many iteration, you may learn that some element of your product or strategy is flawed and decided it is time to make a change, which I call a pivot to a different method for achieving your vision. Startups are especially at risk when outside stakeholders and investors, especially corporate CFOs for internal projects, have a crisis of confidence when the project was authorized or the investment made. The entrepreneur promised that the new product would be world changing. Customers were supposed to flock to it in record numbers. Why are so few actually doing so? In traditional management, a manager who promises to deliver something and fails to do so is in trouble. There are only two possible explanations: a failure of execution or a failure to plan appropriately. Both are equally excusable. Entrepreneur manager face a difficult problem because the plans and the projections we make are full of uncertainty. How can we claim success when we inevitable fails to deliver what we promise? Put another way, how does the CFOs and VC know that we are failing because we learned something critical and not because we were goofing off or misguided? The solution to this problem resides at the heart of the lean startup model. We all need a disciplined, systematic approach to figure out if we are making progress and discovering if we actually achieve validated learning. I call this system innovation accounting or alternate or traditional accounting design. Specifically for a startup, it is the subject of chapter 7. Chapter 7 Major. At the beginning, a startup is a little more than a model on a piece of paper. The financial in the business plan include projection of how many customers the company expect to interact, how much it will spend and how much revenue and profit that will leads to. It's an ideal that usually far from where the startup is in the early days. A startup job is to rigorously measure where it is the right now, confronting the hard truths that assessment reveals, and then devise experiment to learn how to move the real number closer to the ideal reflected in the business plan. Most products, even the ones that fail, do not have zero traction. Most products have some customer, some growth, and some positive result. One of the most dangerous outcome for a startup is to bumble along in the land of the living. That employees and entrepreneurs tend to be optimistic by nature. We want to keep believing in our ideas even when the writing is on the wall. There is why the myth of perseverance is so dangerous. We all know stories of epic entrepreneurs who managed to pull out a victory when things seems incredibly bleak. Unfortunately, we don't hear stories about the countless nameless other who preserved too long and leading their companies to failure. Why something as seemingly dull as accounting will change your life? People are accustomed to thinking of accounting as dry and boring, unnecessary evil used primarily to prepare financial report and survive audit. But there is because accounting is something that has become taken for granted. Historically, under the leadership of people such as Alfred Sloan at General Motors, accounting became an essential part of the method of exerting centralized control over far-flung division. Accounting allowed GM to set clear milestone for each of its division and then hold each manager accountable for his or her division's success in reaching those goals. All modern all modern corporations use some variation of that approach. Accounting is the key to their success. Unfortunately, the standard accounting is not helpful in evaluating entrepreneurs. Startups are too unpredictable for forecast and milestones to be accurate. I recently met with phenomenal startup team. They are well financed, have significant customer traction, and are growing rapidly. Their product is a leader in the emerging category of enterprise software that use consumer marketing technique to sell into large companies. For example, they rely on the employee to employ viral adoption rather than a traditional sales process, which might target the chief information officer or the head of the information technology. As a result, they have the opportunity to use cutting edge experimental technique as the constantly revise their product. During the meeting, I ask the team a simple question that I make a habit of asking startup where whenever we meet. Are you making your product better? They always say yes. Then I ask, how do you know? I invariably get this answer, well, we are in engineering and we made a number of changes last month and our customer seems to like them and our overall numbers are higher this month. We must be on the right track. This is the kind of storytelling that takes place at most startup board meeting. Most milestones are built the same way. Hit a certain product milestones, maybe talk to a few customer and see if the number go up. Unfortunately, this is not a good indicator of whether startup is making progress. How do we know that the changes we have made are related to the result we are seeing? More important, how do you know that we are drawing the right lesson from those changes? To answer these kind of questions, startup have a strong need for a new kind of accounting geared especially to disruptive innovation. That's what innovation accounting is. An accountability framework that work across industries. Innovation accounting enables startup to prove objectively that they are learning how to grow a sustainable business. Innovation accounting begins by turning the leap of faith assumption discussed in chapter 5 into a quantitative financial model. Every business plan has some kind of model associated with it, even if they are written on the back of a napkin. That model provides assumption about what the business will look like at a successful point in the future. For example, the business plan for an established manufacturing company would show it growing in a proportion to its sales volume. As the profit from the sales of goods are reinvented in marketing and promotion, the company gains new customer. The rate of growth depends primarily on three things: the profitability of each customer, the cost of acquiring new customer, and the cost of acquiring new customer and the repeat purchase rate of the existing customer. The higher these values are, the faster the company will grow and the more profitable it will be. These are the drivers of the company's growth model. By contrast, a marketplace company that match buyers and sellers, such as eBay, will have a different growth model. Its success depends primarily on the network effect that make it the premier destination for both buyers and sellers to transact business. Sellers want the marketplace with the highest number of potential customer. Buyer want the marketplace with the most competition among seller, which leads to the greatest availability of products and the lowest prices. In economics, this sometimes is called supply side increasing return and demand side increasing return. For this kind of startup, the important thing to measure is that the network effect are working, as evidenced by the high retention rate of new buyers and sellers. If people of new buyers and seller, if people stick with the product with very little attrition, the marketplace will grow no matter how the company acquire new customer. The growth curve will look like a compounding interest table with the rate of growth depending on the interest rate of new customer coming to the product. Through these two business have very different drivers of growth, we can still use a common framework to hold their leaders accountable. This framework supports accountability even when the model changes. How innovation accounting works. Three learning milestones. Innovation accounting works in three steps. First, use as a minimum viable product to establish real data on where the company is right now without a clear eyed picture of your current status, no matter how far from the goal you may be, you cannot begin to track your progress. Second, startup must attempt to tune the engine from the baseline towards the ideal. This may take many attempts after the startup has made all the macro changes and product optimization. It can be move its baseline towards the ideal. The company reach a decision point that is the third step: pivot or preserve. If the company is making good progress towards the ideal, that means it's learning appropriately and using that learning effectively, in which case it makes sense to continue. If not, the management team eventually moves conclude that its current product strategy is flawed and need a serious change. When a company pivots, they start the process all over again, re-establishing a new baseline and then tuning the engine from there. The sign of a successful pivot is that these engines tuning activities are more productive after the pivot than before. Establish the baseline. For example, a startup might create a complete prototype of its product and offer to sell it to real customer through its main marketing channel. This single MVP would test most of the starter assumptions and establish baseline metrics for each assumption simultaneously. Alternatively, a startup might prefer to build separate MVPs that are aimed at getting feedback on one assumption at a time before building the prototype. The company might perform a smoke test with its marketing material. This is an old direct marketing technique in which customers are given the opportunity to pre-order a product that has not yet been built. A smoke test measure only one thing: whether customers are interested in trying a product by itself. This is insufficient to validate an entire growth model. Nonetheless, it can be very useful to get feedback on this assumption before committing more money and other resources to the product. These MVP provide the first example of a learning milestones. On MVP allow a startup to fill a real baseline data in its growth model: conversion rates, sign up and trial rates, customer lifetime value, and so on. This is a valuable as the foundation for learning about customer and their reaction to a product, even if that foundation begins with extremely bad news. When one is choosing among the many assumptions in a business plan, it makes sense to test the riskiest assumption first. If you can find a way to mitigate these risks towards the ideal that is required for a sustainable business, there is no point in testing the other. For example, a media business that is selling advertisement has two basic assumptions that take the form of questions: can it capture the attention of a defined customer segment on an ongoing basis, and can it sell that attention to advertisers? In a business in which the advertising rates for a particular customer segment are well known, the far riskier assumption is the ability to capture attention. Therefore, the first experiment should involve content production rather than advertising sales. Perhaps the company will produce a pilot episode or issue to see how customer engage. Tuning the engine. Once the baseline has been established, the startup can work towards the second learning milestone: tuning the engine. Every product development, marketing, or other initiative that a startup undertakes should be target and improve one of the driver of its growth model. For example, a company might expand for spend time improving the design of its product to make it easier for the new customer to use. The presupposes that the activation rate of new customer is a driver of growth and that its baseline is lower than the company would like. To demonstrate validated learning, the company changes must improve the activation rate of new customer. If they do not, the new design should be judged a failure. This is an important rule. A good design is one that changes customer behavior for the better. Compared to startup, the first company set out with a clear baseline metric, a hypothesis about what will improve that metric, and set of experiment designed to test that hypothesis. The second team sits around debating what would improve the product, implement several of those changes at once, and calibrates if there is any positive increase in any of the number, which startup is more likely to be doing effective work and achieving lasting result.